Welcome to Liberty in America, Past, Present, and Future with Dr. Bill Choby. Doc is a historian and a reenactor. On this show, you'll hear his thoughts about our personal liberties from their earliest recorded beginnings. You'll also be transported back to the 1750s to relive the life of Colonel George Washington and his adventures during the French and Indian War. Let's get started. Here's Dr. Bill Choby.
Okay, here we are again. Dr. Bill Choby calling here. We're talking about liberty in America, past, present, and future. Excerpts from my book. And since we've concluded the last chapter on the last podcasts, I want to take us in a little more contemporary direction. And I'm going to call this Liberty Lights. These are examples of daily examples, weekly examples of how our liberties have been affected across the United States in one way or another. And I think you'll, over time, you'll tend to understand and perhaps agree with me that our liberties have been greatly threatened by not only federal government, but state government and even local governments and school boards. If you recall, the real thesis of all of this is that when might is right, people are in bondage. When right is might, people are free. When right becomes wrong, we live in chaos. And then our choice is either go back to might is right and be in bondage, or to go back to right is might and be free. This past week, we've had an interesting series of stories, news stories that had to do directly with our liberties that I think we need to pay attention to. There's some of it has to do with the extent of the administrative state to extend into our lives. And the most significant of all this past week was that when the Supreme Court of the United States ruled 9-0 unanimously on an EPA waters rule, and which essentially was that the EPA decided that on their own that they were going to continue to expand their influence over private property under the guise of protecting the environment according to the Clean Water Act. So this was a challenge by a private individual, two of them, that felt that this puddle in their backyard that came after a heavy rain that would then eventually run into a ditch, which ran into a creek, which ran into a river, which ran into the ocean, that somehow or another was enough to keep to allow the EPA to classify their backyard as a wetlands. And because it was wetlands, then that changed what they could do with their property, as well as the extension of the federal government into that their private property. Remember, the Fourth Amendment protects unduly in violations of privacy. Well, the property's privacy too. So these people sued, and they alleged that their property was not waters of the United States. So now in the past, court split an analysis of how the federal government should define a water source under the Clean Water Act. Clean Water Act goes back to the 70s. This was a spinoff that came out of the original Earth days. And it's had a very wide-ranging effect, particularly on farmers who's had to limit the use of fertilizer, even hundreds, if not thousands of miles away from the source of the water that the EPA was supposedly regulating. So this case that came up, again, 9-0, it forced the EPA to define what was the waters of the United States, being essentially navigable waters, but to put it into a temporary wetlands after a hard rain was simply much, even for the most liberal members of the court to view. So this was a real big win for the 26 states that filed amicus briefs in support of these people. But remember, these people had to put up personal post-tax dollar cash to hire attorneys and to defend themselves against the never-ending funding source of the EPA, using our tax dollars to fight with those people. And this is a real gist of my complaint about the administrative state, is that if it's not even a fair fight, if it were, the people that were taking on the government would at least have some way to get their cash back or get some kind of support. Oftentimes there are groups of funding mechanisms like GoFundMe that come alive when these issues become real hot button nationally that support these people. But they're all using post-tax dollars to fight our tax dollars of the federal government. Whether it's at the federal level, state level, or local level, the story's the same. It's private dollars fighting government dollars, which is our money too. So in this case, it showed that there was the EPA had exceeded their authority, and that it really shut them down. This has been going on for quite a long time, and this was a very encouraging constraint on the use of a bureaucracy to grow beyond their original statutory intent. And they all do it. They all really do it. Now, in another case, it had to do with the environment. This was something about environmental justice. Now, remember, the idea of mixing environment issues and justice issues is like apples and oranges. And as I said before, when you mix apples and oranges, you get a fruit salad. Well, this is a real fruit salad that they're trying to turn into a racial issue. So Louisiana came along and they said, the ever-expanding federal government is just coming into where it's not only is it just about the environment, but it has to do with this idea that there's some type of justice tied to environmental actions. And of course, in Louisiana, where this happened, the petrochemical industry is it's their lifeblood down there. So in this case, it challenged again the EPA, and the EPA was opposed to state permits granted in 2020 to two facilities in St. John's Parish, Louisiana. And the EPA argued that the permitting process violated the federal and racial discrimination statutes. So see, this is where the environmental justice stuff comes in. It's really insane. So saying that activities will be perfectly lawful under environmental law were now threatened because the EPA believes those actions incur proximate to the wrong racial groups. Isn't that amazing now? They're using the environment to turn this into a racial issue. Well, you know why they do that, because everything is racial when it comes to this government today. It's all about supposedly, equity, but there's a bunch of garbage, a bunch of nonsense. So when they're taken to court over this, again, they have to put their apples and oranges together. And I seriously doubt that the court's going to rule in favor of the EPA. It just creates this whole nonsense about one group versus another. And in essence, it violates the Civil Rights Act, the very act that was supposed to discriminate and take away racism in America. Now, this thread or these methods of using past plannings or past government policies to claim racism now that they're already gone is also used by Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg, who claimed that highways were racist because they ran through communities of color. And of course, the highways were built in many cases long before the communities of color, quote unquote, appeared. So this is how the administration is using to mix apples and oranges in order to confuse people and push their agenda of basically permanent power. Let's not kid around with this. These people are interested in staying in power forever. They've had the advantage of 40 years of Democrat control before Newt Gingrich came along in 1994. We were able to stop that with a contract with America, but they're back. These people are career politicians. They're of the guardian class, as they feel, and they're going to do what they want to do. And part of this is to push the racial issue as far as they can in order to gender as much support as they can. And here it is, the abuse of the bureaucracy to promote those kinds of ideals when the EPA was supposed to be concerned entirely with the environment and not with these racial issues. Now, another case that caught my attention had to do with a 94-year-old grandmother. Now, she got a win before the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, you can only wonder, what are they doing bothering a 94-year-old grandmother? Well, and again, she had to use her own money to fight this fight, but this was a woman who had, in Minnesota, she's grandmother, and she had her condo seized over an unpaid tax debt. So the state then sold the property and kept all the sales proceeds, which was far more than what she actually owed. And so it was the debt was around $15,000, the penalties, interest, et cetera, and the home that was sold for $40,000 under the Minnesota forfeiture laws. The county kept the surplus to the tune of $25,000. Now, to many people, $25,000 may not seem like a whole lot when you consider what it's going to take to fight this to the Supreme Court, but to this woman, it was everything she owned, and I really applaud her for taking them on like this. So fortunately, she was able to get some good lawyers, and they argued that the government violated the Fifth Amendment takings clause when they confiscated her property. It was with more than the debt owed by the owner. But here's the sad thing, is that we've got lower courts ruled against her. Now, what's the matter with these people? The Supreme Court then unanimously sided with her. And she, as I said, she had a valid claim under the takings clause. Excuse that noise. That was my dog. He happened to suddenly jump up. He heard something outside. But you see how sad this is. This is this woman's property, and not to make it racial, but she was a woman of color. But to think that this is something that the local government, the state government, and the lower courts would actually think is fair, it just shows you how corrupted and how immorally deficient our government and our lower judges have become. I mean, we should be grateful that we have some clear-minded people in the Supreme Court. And of course, the left wants to go and change that by adding more justices. And of course, that whole scenario was to make this kind of thing possible. So I applaud this woman, this grandmother from Minnesota, for taking on task of these people of the state. And she ultimately won. So she got $25,000 of her money back. I just hope it wasn't totally spent on attorneys, that others fit in and helped her out, because that's really a landmark kind of decision that would help many other people who are in that sort of situation. So thank you, Supreme Court, for doing the right thing for this woman. Now let's move on to what the United Nations is doing. This is this is nuts. That's all there is. It's just nuts. Here we have first of all, we shouldn't even be in the United Nations anymore. They're no longer about us. They're about taking us down. They want to go and extend their authority and their jurisdiction and sovereignty over what we're doing in this country. And it just doesn't work. We should totally defund these people. It's a joke. But now they're pushing this idea. Of course, they're calling for this International Women's Day. They had a report they released that had to do with criminal laws regarding sex with minors. These are kids under 18 years old. So essentially, sex with this would be statutory rape. But here they're pushing for a legal framework to protect pedophiles and prostitutes. There's in this document there are calls for decriminalization of prostitution and the total legalization of abortion. Now, in a way, with the Democrats today, and many of the Democrats, the more extreme ones, believe that abortion should be available at any time during a pregnancy, and some have gone as far as to say that you should have a right to post-birth abortion, if you will, up to a month. In other words, infanticide, up to a month after a child is born. Again, these people are morally deficient, and this is a clear example of just how far off base they have come away from basic human dignity and human values. But to have the UN go in here and stick their nose in this sort of thing, they're saying that as long as it's consensual sex conduct, that it doesn't matter how old the person is. There's no minimal age for it. Well, that's absurd. It's just like this transgender stuff that, you can't kids can't get their ears pierced unless they're have parental consent up to 18 years old, but yet they can go and have all these crazy sex change operations that are permanent. And my take on all of this is that because of the abortion pill, the number of abortions that these Planned Parenthood centers and hospitals are doing has dropped so much. I think they said 5 million abortions were done with the pills rather than with the procedures. And that means less money in the pocket of this abortion industry. And so the next step, of course, was to get a whole generation of youngsters onto this gender change business with different surgeries, radical mastectomies in little girls, and the different ways to, how am I going to say this? I thought getting nasty. They're basically making them sterile. But what they don't tell you in a lot of this stuff is that these people that are ongoing through this transition have to keep taking medicines the rest of their lives in order to keep their bodies under the kind of control into the whatever sexual gender they wish to be. So that what that means is big bucks for these people and who are in the abortion industry. So they're not making money on abortions so much anymore because there aren't as many of them, but they are making big bucks on this transgender stuff and the fact that those people now are patients or they're clients for life with the medications that they're taking. It's just horrible. It's just, you think you only read about this stuff in pagan societies, but here we are. This is the UN. That's why I say we ought to just get rid of these guys. And the last one I want to talk to you about today has to do with a professor. And this professor was at the Michigan State University. And the classroom, the professor was literally trying to force Christian students to fund Planned Parenthood. And unfortunately, we have some people with backbone, and it's usually people of faith that you find that are taking on these tasks. But this, can you imagine? They're paying tens of thousands of dollars to go to universities as opposed to get a degree, and they're told that they have to go and give money to Planned Parenthood because that's a good thing, a morally good thing to do. Why would a business professor even discuss these sorts of things is beyond me. But we know that what's happening with a lot of the companies that have gone woke, that they're using their investments of people who buy stock in them, they're using those investments to pursue or to forward or support the woke agenda. And there's a growing number of people who are resulting in lawsuits against these companies who are not interested in their stockholders, but and the reason they have stockholders is to make money. And you can't blame them. That's how it goes. And there's nothing wrong with that. But for them to use money, other people's money, to forward an agenda that doesn't bring the same return on the investment is really sad. So as word is getting out on some of these companies, people are backing off and they're moving their stocks and their investments away from them. But here's yet the latest example of how the far left community in the universities are trying to go and to force their values onto another generation of people, which includes the whole idea of Planned Parenthood, which is to kill babies. Remember what we said about this originally. Planned Parenthood was started to get rid of black babies, and the black babies born in New York City are less than those killed by abortions. Sad to say. And so if that isn't racist, I don't know. But Planned Parenthood is just a piece of work. That's all I can say. And the last thing I wanted to bring up was that, and it sort of ties it all together. Department of Homeland Security, this federal Department of Homeland Security. They've been using our money, the Biden administration, this is, and that actually really goes back to Barry Obama, Barry Soweto, who called himself Barack Obama, the accidental president, if you will. But he had the idea that he wanted to fundamentally change America, and how he's doing it is through the bureaucracies. So the bureaucrats are highly protected through civil service laws, and the president gets to pick somebody who sits on top of the secretary of the departments, and they have, of course, enormous sway of what goes on down the line on that bureaucracy. So in effect, it's a very subtle way, a very covert way for the Obama and Biden administration to push their agenda into the community at large. And this example is probably the most egregious I've seen yet. Department of Homeland Security funneled $40 million into anti-terrorist programs and weaponized a program called, of course, when they call these things something, it always sounds good. They called it Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program. And the idea was that they were going to find all these gangs and terrorists within. These are domestic terrorists, quote, the ones that they are always talking about that are white supremacists. Of course, the Black Lives Matter, they're not terrorists. And of course, Antifa is not terrorists. But, people that are white and Christian are terrorists for some reason. And it's pretty easy to understand why the federal government, which is an immoral dog and pony show, and intent on subduing the American people to their way of moral standards, the might versus right kind of thing. And this is yet another way to do it. So they put $85,000 to $1.9 million, went into this supposedly free speech process. But essentially, though, and even though it sounded good, the money went to political opponents. And the weaponization of the federal government is just really scary. In Ohio, the University of Dayton received $350,000 to establish this Prevents OH, or Prevents in Ohio, I assume it is, against domestic violence, extremism, and hate. And part of that was to include a pyramid of far-right radicalization, which identifies the violent extremists, and to include or to suppress Christian Broadcast Network, the Heritage Foundation, Fox News, Turning Point, PragerU, National Rifle Association, Breitbart News, the American Conservative Union Foundation, and even a Republican National Committee. I mean, think about this. They're using our tax dollars to get rid of their political enemies to push this radical agenda, which is to fundamentally change America into essentially a democratic tyranny or Democrat tyrants, with they themselves in charge, to tell us how to live and what we have to put up with, including infanticide and all the other goofy stuff they come up with. So here it is. This is extremely disturbing. But again, you see, the people that are opposing this liberal agenda are Christians, the people of faith, Judeo-Christian tradition. That's America. And those of you who are listening to this, at some point in time, you have to take a stand on where you're going to be with this. If you're going to put up with this kind of nonsense by supporting the Democrat Party, we can expect to see more and more of our liberty go away. Well, I know I said many times before that when might is right, we live in bondage. Well, I don't particularly like the idea of living in bondage, but this is going to take a massive effort by all Americans who finally realize that enough is enough. They've crossed the line. They're moral. We are a Christian country being ruled by pagans, and we have to take a stand. So now what are we going to do? Well, I can assure you there's one way that we can shut this whole thing down. And I'm not saying this to sound like I'm radical, but I'm saying this is a very effective solution. These people only understand one thing, and that's power. So we must take the power away from them. How do we do that? Pretty much very simple. Just never vote for a Democrat. We'll just shut down the Democrat Party with a boycott every election. I don't care whether it's dog catcher or president. No Democrats. You do a few cycles like that, and these people are going to wake up real fast as they fall out of power. So there's just a couple examples we talked about tonight. I want to put together these hopefully every week as I scan through the news looking for threats to liberty, whether it be property or personal freedoms. And I want to bring that to you to draw attention and focus on to what we need to keep in mind about why America is great and why our freedom, individual freedom, is so necessary that we take a stand against these government agencies who are coming to make their might our right and put us in bondage. Dr. Bill Chobe signing off. Remember, Liberty in America, past, present, future. You can find that at drbillchobebooks.com. And my podcasts are there, as well as some other information about the freedoms we face. Thanks so much. I hope you enjoyed this session. Bye.